Got it?
Should I hand it in?
Can you hand it in? Yeah, just so I can pull it up here and we can have a quick look.
I feel like I did more than this.
Here we go. Yeah.
I remember doing a challenge and a support, but I don't know what it is.
How it challenges, how it supports. Big issue, how it supports.
I remember I didn't finish it, but
No.
I think I did. I finished that how it supports, and
Okay. Connie, have you got?
yeah, I would just. Has this just been posted? This question, or is it?
No, it was last Thursday. You were working on it. Here we go. Right. Okay, so I've just got your notes up here, Connie, and just have a look at this. Okay, so the big issue, oh no. This is just your notes on
Yeah, it's down. I
big
think.
issue later on. Here we go. Okay. Right. So, an introduction discussing the Big Issues Manifesto and context of its establishment and how it came about. Good. You need to also refer to Vogue in your introduction as well, I would have thought. Yeah. So your introductory paragraph will be establishing the kind of the business model for the two magazines. So the Vogue being part of a conglomerate, Big Issue being unique in that it is explaining how the industry works. So point one, it's uniqueness and unconventional ways in the industry to try and uplift the homeless instead of dragging them down. Good. They act as a business industry instead of an entertainment industry, allowing homeless people to be their own micro entrepreneurs. Good.
Some of it might not make sense because I was just.
So you're right. So you're okay. So when you're structuring this essay, you want to make sure that your introduction deals with both magazines first, and then explain in your introduction that you're going to talk about whichever one you're going to talk about first, and then the other. Okay. It doesn't really matter which order, but I would tend to think that generally, when you get a question where you're being asked to evaluate a theorist for the industries, they're probably the theories are probably going to apply more to Vogue than to the Big Issue, whatever the question is. So we think if you get a Curran and Seaton question like this one, or as we'll be looking at later, a Hesmondhalgh one about minimizing risk and maximizing audience, they're probably going to apply more to Vogue and less to the Big Issue because they are non-mainstream, they're sort of challenging. So I would probably imagine that you'd want to structure your essay with talking about Vogue first and then the Big Issue, but it doesn't matter for now. Counterpoint, however, with the record of how much it is profiting could mean they're trying a new formula to maximize profit and minimize risk. For instance, they sold 300,000 copies a week, which was more than how much Vogue sells now. Good, yes, so try and give a bit of context to that. When were they selling 300,000 copies a week?
In the economic boom, so in their prime.
In the early 2000s, yeah? And even after they declined for a bit, they learned to rebrand and relaunch so they can start maximising their profit again. Good. The counterpoint for this counterpoint, However, they might want to start maximising their profit because the more they gain, the more likely the homeless people can make their own profit too.
Oh, like the fact that they're gaining more money. I think I was trying to say, like, though their manifesto means to uplift people, if they're selling more and more and more, they sort of become a bit like the conglomerates who just lack creativity, just want to make profit, but then also the homeless people can still. Does that make sense? Like.
Yeah. So.
it's different,
So there is a risk that in order to be able to maximise their profits, which they're doing in order to help homeless people, they might have to become less mainstream.
Yeah.
Is that, yeah? Okay, yeah, good point. You could also say that their so to branch out into 7 different offices, similar to how Vogue has branched out internationally, seems like a way to create and gain profit. But their profit again goes into a good cause, as it's for charity. Their method to have digital convergence is similar to Vogue trying to become accessible on every single media platform present as this 360-degree consumer experience. Yeah, good. So mention that the big issue has its own online presence. Yeah, okay. So point 4, how Vogue uses their establishment to be able to create whatever creative ideas they want without causing risk and maximising profit, giving 2 points and 2 explanations for it. All right, so this is a point to develop. So can we give some examples of how Vogue is able to become creative because of the size of the company? It doesn't have to be you, Connie. Anyone got any ideas of Vogue's adventurousness?
I guess because they are a conglomerate and they have a lot of like profit that they can rely on, like they know that they are having, like they have a stable audience who's going to buy the magazine, so they can take a few more risks because they can afford to.
Yeah, and can you give me any concrete examples of ways in which they have taken a risk? So.
The like guest edits with Nelson Mandela.
Nelson Mandela, good. When did that happen?
1970s.
90s, early 1990s. Yeah, Nelson Mandela. Any other examples of Vogue having done something risky? First black cover model in the late 1960s. Yeah. Okay. Good. Causing risk and maximising profit, giving 2 points and 2 explanations for this. All right, how can we counter that? So can we think of examples where Vogue perhaps so is essentially a profit-making magazine, and is there anything that you can think of that would be supportive of Curran and Seaton's argument that because they are such a big company, they don't diversify or take risks?
Vogue or big?
Vogue.
Like they don't go into other digital, like they don't do much digital.
They were quite late to the digital world. I think their digital presence is quite reflective of the magazine itself. It's not particularly innovative. But I would say it's quite this question, both magazines in their own way are challenging Curran and Seaton's ideas. I think it's quite difficult to think of negative examples about Vogue sort of being kind of.
Does it like stick a lot to sort of what it knows will succeed, so like the fashion and makeup and things?
So you could make that point, certainly, yes. And then I would also then develop it and say, but because it's such a brand leader as a magazine, it has in a way sort of diversified the market. It has encouraged innovation in fashion and a sort of representation of women, and also, you know, it's diversified out into Vogue for men and Vogue for teens and so on. It really is a kind of a brand leader, and in that it's able to take risks. So I think, by and large, if you get a question, I mean, this was an actual question, so I don't think that you won't get this precise wording, but if you did get a question about how Vogue, or the big issue, or how the magazine industry as a whole doesn't take risks, I think you could argue against it quite convincingly with the two magazines that we have, because they're both, in their own way, they challenge conformity. So your conclusion, Connie, ending on what both Vogue and the big issue do to create profit, but in some ways they actually break conventionality of the magazine industry and go against their theory of lack of creativity and thought. Good. All right, so that's a nice structure there. Let's see if we've got anything else. Okay, Silvana. Oh, excellent. Here we go. So, do you mind if I go through this, Silvana, on board? Just have a quick look. I don't want to sort by. Here we go. Curran and Seaton say the bigger the conglomerate, the less creative the product. Yep. Vogue is owned by a conglomerate. That agrees with Curran and Seaton's theory, since they are owned by Condé Nast. Good. Which owns a variety of other smaller magazine brands. Vogue, Teen Vogue, Glamour, Allure, etc. Yep. So remember, we can list other magazines in the Condé Nast stable. This follows how a small number of large companies make up the market and are controlled by a conglomerate. This ties in with how conglomerates only focus on making profit, which goes to the idea that because they only care about profit, they repeat their already profiting, I would say profitable, idea and diversify, which is apparent with Vogue when they make Teen Vogue, Vogue Mexico, Vogue Brazil, Vogue Japan, etc. Okay, good. However, independent magazines such as The Big Issue challenge the idea that industries are controlled by a small number of powerful companies, since in The Big Issue they are completely independent and not owned by a large conglomerate. Still quite successful, especially in the early 2000s. They used to sell 300,000 copies. Agree with the idea that small conglomerates do take over the industry, since due to technological advancements, print magazines in general have been losing profit, and The Big Issue, well done, has turned to Zinio, a conglomerate, to distribute the magazine online. To distribute the magazine online, that is, okay? Yeah. But unlike what Curran and Seaton say, The Big Issue isn't in for the profit, since the money they do make still goes out to vendors and people who need it. Good. So you can, remember, give a little bit more detail here. The price structure. Yeah, so 50% of the sale of the magazine goes directly to the vendor. Directly to the vendor. In their theory, there's the idea that conglomerates lack creativity after already having a successful media product. That for the main part is quite true, but certain media products do challenge that idea, such as Vogue. During the 1950s, first magazine to use coloured camera shoots in their magazines, as well as being one of the first magazines to include an African-American model, as well as inviting artists like Andy Warhol to draw the cover as well, which challenges the idea that Vogue, which is distributed by a big conglomerate, lacks creativity, doesn't try and take a risk. Good. The Big Issue also draws in the idea of making more profit, having celebrities come in and be guest editors in the magazine, which draws in new audiences who are fans of those guest celebrities. This creates the idea that The Big Issue is trying to lure in a mass audience, since they have celebrities from Robert Downey Jr., who played Iron Man in Marvel. Yeah, you might not have to. It's up to you, but I don't know whether you really need to necessarily explain who these people are. It might take you a bit of time. You know, I don't think you're going to get extra points for saying who Daniel Radcliffe is. So just mention a couple of celebrities, but don't kind of go into the detail of who they are, I don't think. Global sensations reach an international audience, playing with the idea that the big issue is going after more profit and targeting mainstreamers. Okay, you're fond of Harry Potter and Marvel, huge franchises, wanting to stay in touch with what their favourite actors are doing, further connoting the big issue being after making profit. However, they use that money for social enterprises, which goes against Curran and Seaton's idea of only being in it for profit. Good, covered a lot of ground there. All right, so obviously, thank you for letting me put your ideas up on the board. There are, hopefully, if you haven't yet done this or completed it, I would like you to create a plan for this question. I'm going to show you now. I don't know if you've got them with you. I gave you some printouts last week of an essay. No?
No, sorry.
You haven't got it. Okay, I'll bring it up on the board. I have to do it via this computer. So, I'll show you an example of a fairly comprehensive answer to this question that did well. Annoying. Erase these two computers, see which one does it first. Okay. X20. Print to section A. Here we go. Right. Discussion of magazine industry. Okay, so that one was actually on different magazines. This is our one. Here we go. Okay, so I wanted to show you this just so you can see the kind of level of detail that somebody's going into. This one scored 23 out of 30, okay, so it's a pretty good essay. We'll read it, we'll see what's good about it and what maybe is missing. So, Curran and Seaton argue that media industries are generally controlled by a small number of powerful companies whose main purpose is to create a profit. So you can see that this candidate obviously quickly remembered to make a note of Vogue being run by Condé Nast, the big issue being a social business, and for some reason they've listed Lisbeth Van Zunen as something that they want to make sure that they remember. Let's see to what extent they've tied Van Zunen in, because Van Zunen isn't really necessarily obviously directly relevant to this question, perhaps. It's, she's obviously very much a representation theorist, but you'll be able to see how they brought some other theorists in and haven't just concentrated exclusively on Curran and Seaton. Anyway, so first point, Vogue is published by Condé Nast, Tick, which is a part of a major conglomerate, Tick. Condé Nast also produces other popular magazines that take over the market. Well, we could have developed that with a few examples of which magazines Condé Nast owns. So just as a little bit of revision, Georgie, give me a Condé Nast magazine. Teen Vogue, good. Give me one that no one's mentioned before. GQ, yeah. Say again? Allure. Glamour, good. Okay. All right. So I would say, actually, I would save Teen Vogue, Georgie, because that's when you're talking about a conglomerate, you really want to give examples of other titles that are owned that are possibly even rival title. Well, you could be considered as rival titles, but they're all owned by the same conglomerate. It always strikes me as strange that that one conglomerate runs so many what I would consider to be such similar magazines. But obviously, you'll be able to. If you think about differentiating the demographic slightly, Glamour is targeting slightly different. What's different about Glamour to Vogue?
Younger? It's more informal.
More informal, less high fashion, perhaps. Is it? Yeah.
I feel like it's more like gossip than.
Okay. Yeah. So, if a question encourages you to write that, you might just have a little think about how the different titles within Condé Nast are, although they are ostensibly all fashion magazines, all the ones we've listed there, they are dealing with different demographics. GQ is, I suppose, quite a lot of it is a man's lifestyle magazine, but there's a lot of men's fashion in there as well, but it's targeted at men. Good. This makes Condé Nast controlling the industry. Vogue is a woman's magazine and it's driven by the idea to create profit. Tick. Can't read what that says there. Discussion of the magazine industry is there. It's cut off. There's nothing particularly outstandingly insightful there, is there? I think you could write a more insightful introduction to Vogue here. Also, they don't refer to the big issue in their introduction. I think an introduction should set up the contrast between the two magazines. So I would have expected the introduction to deal with both magazines to begin with. Vogue has many typical representations of women in their adverts. For example, in the Q-Tex advert, the use of hyperbole, "Don't forget your bare essentials," suggests that lipstick is an essential for women, and the main image highlights how women should maintain their appearance with makeup to be more like the model, who is an idealised version of beauty. Tick. You notice there are fewer good points here. That was a long time before we got a tick there. Okay. This.
Is that not like more representation?
It's more about representation, isn't it?
Industry.
Yeah. We're not really.
There's a lot about representation.
There's a lot about representation, and there's nothing about modern Vogue here. It's all about the 1960s set text. That by all means you can refer to your set edition of Vogue, because you'll be referring to your set edition of the big issue, because it's a pretty modern edition. But I think you do need to bring in your knowledge about Vogue, the history of it, but also the much more recent developments. And so far, we haven't had anything about modern Vogue here. This, in combination with a Revlon advert that questions, "Are you woman enough?" I think, which challenges women's identity and sexual liberation, represent women in traditional ways. Yeah, not getting a tick here. This shows that even though these representations of women conform to the societal expectations of women in the 1960s, they were still included. This may be because advertisements created more profit for Vogue, therefore reflecting Curran and Seaton's view that companies' main purpose is to create profit. And maybe women would be represented in more empowered ways if this was not the case. Tick. Okay, but I would expect, perhaps, if you were thinking about modern Vogue, to think about ways in which women can be empowered through the magazine, and how the Condé Nast have recognised that there is a huge amount of profit to be made from appealing to and empowering modern women, because I think, you know, just concentrating on the 1960s when it's saying here that women weren't empowered and were only thinking about makeup, it's rather reductive, and I'm surprised this one has done as well as it has, to be honest. The big issue stuff is a bit better here. However, the big issue is a social business and is published independently, which allows them to be more niche and alternative. The big issue was created to help the increasing levels of homelessness and austerity in London by giving vendors the chance to make a legitimate income through selling the big issue. Tick, yeah, maybe a bit more detail on the structure of how the business works. This challenges Curran and Seaton's idea because it is not a not-for-profit business. Reasonable, straightforward evaluation. Vogue is similar to other women's magazines and was published when there was an increase in consumerism and women had more financial freedom. This is evident in the Money article, so again, going back to the set text, but nothing about modern Vogue, where it talks about women investing their money rather than keeping it in a bank. Therefore, the article was targeting high-class, middle-class women who would buy the magazine and buy products advertised, such as the new Revlon eyeliner, to become more like the aspirational female shown in the main image, and use the media product as tools to construct their own identity. This reflects Gauntlet's identity theory and supports Curran and Seaton's idea that the main purpose of the magazine is to create profit. So essentially all they've done is they've sort of, it sounds like they've pre-prepared an essay about Vogue, and they've just peppered it with this sentence: supports Curran and Seaton's idea that the main purpose of the magazine is to create profit, quoting from the question. But they, by and large, they've been rewarded for it. Okay, so it carries on, by the way. We've got a bit more here about the big issue, but I would just say, don't ever feel like you don't know what to say in an answer, okay? If you deal with the theorist that comes up in the question, by all means. It might target a specific theorist and ask you to challenge them, or it might ask you more generally to talk about representation or the creation of audiences or whatever. But don't be afraid to bring in other things that you have observed and comment on the representation of audiences, because it does, if you think about it, you know, they are all interlinked, these theorists. The reason that certain demographics are represented in this magazine is so that they can create an audience who will want to buy the magazine, and the audience buying the magazine creates the profit, and therefore the industry theorists come in there. So they're all interlinked, and don't be don't feel overawed if you get a question and you think, that's, what am I going to say about that? I barely got a paragraph to write about Curran and Seaton. Bring in some other ideas, some references to other theorists, and you will be rewarded for it. Okay.
So do you talk about Vogue just in general and like dip into the set text?
Dip into the set text.
Rather than like...
Yeah, so if the question asks, it will say, so for example, we've looked at a representation question. There was 2 parts. There was a 15 mark on representation in Vogue and a 15 mark on representation in the big issue.
Yeah.
That was definitely about your set texts. Yeah. If it just talks about the magazine industry in general, then you can refer to the set text, but I would also say how it has developed over the past, because it's nearly 60 years old, that set text now. Yeah.
And because it's like
Digital, yeah, okay, and it's a far more diverse set of representations in there, appealing to a much wider audience, and since 1965 it has branched out into all these different territories as well, and you can mention some of those. The big issue seeks to make a difference to society, and the set edition celebrates 25 years of a publishing revolution. The iconography of Hollywood, Broadway, and bright lights of the typography has connotations of being successful and adds a sense of pride. We've got tick, 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 tick here. 4 ticks for that. But that's media language really, isn't it? We're talking about connotation. We haven't got anything about the industry. I suppose it makes a difference to society, but I would develop that. The use of publishing revolution conveys that they're doing something radically different. Okay, good. Other than other media products, because they are serving a purpose in helping the homeless and improving society. Discussion of magazine industry is logical. This challenges Curran and Seaton's idea that companies' main purpose is to create a profit. However, it could be argued that the big issue needs to create a profit in order to be effective in making a social change and helping the homeless. Logical evaluation. Good. The Big Issue and Vogue have different purposes, therefore their ideologies are different and their target audiences are different. The Big Issue is more socialist and has a clear left-wing stance, whereas Vogue is targeting a higher social class demographic. Therefore, there is a difference in how they conform. All right, I would question that. I think both magazines are targeting a higher social demographic because, as we've said when we're talking about the audiences, they are, by and large, the ABC ones that they are targeting. They're The Big Issue wants people who are fairly affluent and can afford to buy the magazine. It's not cheap. Okay, so I don't think it is, although they might be reformers, they are nonetheless, or people who want to do something altruistic or charitable with their money. They have to be fairly affluent in order to be able to afford the magazine price cover. Vogue is more reflective of Curran and Seaton's theory because The Big Issue was solely made for the purpose of serving a purpose as a logical business. Tick. Well, they've said that already, but tick. They get another point for that. And that's the end of it. It ain't all that, is it?
Well, they get
23 out of 30.
Ah.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Which I feel is really encouraging, okay? Because I feel that you could do a much more detailed answer than that, couldn't you? You could give much more in-depth analysis. You could give specific examples, not just from the set text, but from other editions. Doesn't say anything about digital on here, does it? Okay, what I would like to do is to consider a similar question that hasn't come up. Okay, so I can't give you an example of a 23 out of 30 or more answer to it, okay? But the other industry theorist that you might be asked to apply to magazines is Hesmondhalgh. So, Hesmondhalgh is essentially all about minimizing risk, isn't he? Yeah? And minimizing risk, maximizing profit, and maximizing the audience as well. So appealing to as many people as possible. So let's just think. That's not gonna work. Let's do it blue. Yeah. Point is, just remember which theorist it goes with. Yeah. So Hesmondhalgh, minimizing risk and maximizing profit. And the other part of his theory is vertical and horizontal integration. Okay, so let's just see how this aspect of his theory might apply or not to our two set magazines. Let's think about maximizing profit. So strategies that The Big Issue has to maximize profit.
I think I'm
So I would introduce this. I would caveat it all with the fact that they're a social business, and they're not making profit in order to enrich shareholders or anybody like that, or to make the company larger. Their main purpose, their only purpose with this profit is to be able to distribute it to homeless people and to charities that support homeless people, okay? So once you've got that out of the way, you can then think about, well, you know, they still have to make as much money as possible in order to do as much good as possible. So what are they doing in order to make as much money? What are they doing to make their magazines attractive to their customers?
Do they have celebrity?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So celebrity editors. Good. Can you think of any examples of somebody who's edited it?
Oh.
Not Andy Warhol, no. He died in the 80s before this was founded. Andy Warhol is his art has appeared in Vogue.
I know the one who makes pottery.
Okay, so there are celebrity editors and contributors. If we say that, then you'll get away with it, because Grayson Perry probably has edited an edition since then, but then he was. So we've got Grayson Perry. We've got this might not be a celebrity to you, Jarvis Cocker, pop star from the 90s, who's been around now. Okay, they have had interviews with David Bowie, Theresa May. Okay, if you look at the front cover of the set issue of the big issue, there is a whole list of people who have contributed to that edition. Remember, it's the special 25th anniversary edition. Okay.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so you can take some names from there. Good. Another way they maximise profit is they do take. We don't look at them in the pages that we've been asked to look at, but if you were to look at a whole issue of the big issue, they do take some advertising revenue from large corporations such as Sky TV, or a bank, let's say HSBC. Why might large companies want to advertise in, or be seen to advertise in the big issue?
Because it seems ethical.
Seems ethical, good. Yeah, okay. So it enhances their ethical credentials, we could say, maybe. Yeah, and improves the public's perception of those companies. Good. Okay. So, ways in which Vogue maximise profits. I'll do Vogue in another colour. I'll go green for Vogue. So they have Hollywood actors as cover stars. Okay, you can there, I suppose, refer to Sophia Loren in the 60s, and then think of a modern example. Hollywood actors, they've had Zendaya.
Zendaya? I'm sure they have.
I'm sure they have. Yeah. There'll be people like me marking this, you know, so they'll say, yeah, sounds good. I'm sure they've had Zendaya on front Vogue. Yeah, okay. But you can find some more examples of your own here. Okay. They have a lot of advertisements. There was a statistic from the Mrs. Fisher video. Anyone got it to hand about how much it costs to advertise in?
13,000.
Yeah, yeah. 35,000 for a single page advert. Okay. So there are definitely ways in which both magazines attempt to maximize their profits. Okay. If you were talking about vertical and horizontal integration, how does that apply to Vogue? Does it? So they are horizontally integrated because it means there are lots and lots of the same type of media product in the conglomerate, yeah? So there are lots and lots of different magazines, yeah? Lots of similar magazines in Condé Nast's portfolio. Okay. Vertical integration, you could talk a bit about the different areas that Vogue has expanded into, like their fashion school,
Oh yeah.
or the design school, the hospitality industry as well, perhaps. Okay, but it's mainly a horizontally integrated magazine. Is Big Issue horizontally or vertically integrated? Vertical, yeah. So what have they got?
They produce their own stuff and they print their own stuff.
Yeah.
Magazines.
Produce their own. So they've got magazines. As well as magazines, they've got, independently this is, they have merchandise. They have the Big Issue Foundation, which is their social enterprise wing, but they're not horizontally integrated. They're not part of a conglomerate that has any other magazines because they're independent, yeah? Having said that, I would then go on to say that neither magazine is a good example of Hesmondhalgh's theory of a magazine minimizing risk, and then you go on to explain all of the innovative things that the magazines do, covering exactly the same ground as we talked about with the Curran and Seaton question.
Would they ever give us a regulation?
Regulation, I'm going to double check this, but I'm 95% sure that they do not ask you about regulation for magazine industries.
On its own?
No,
Okay.
but they will ask it about newspapers, probably. Yeah, so we will be doing regulation on newspapers. So, how would we feel about, in tomorrow's lesson, doing an essay? In tomorrow's lesson, not for study, Sam.
I have one right before.
one right
Oh
before?
yeah, we have psychology.
Oh, we've always got psychology.
Honestly, this
She sets it
sets
every.
twice a week.
So it's
Um,
a practice essay every Thursday, a practice test every Monday.
It is
Way too much.
Which is bizarre considering we like haven't learned any of the AO3 for like any.
I would say we could do it on Friday, but we have a radio test on Friday.
Okay.
And we have
Hello,
No,
why are you giving
no.
ideas?
All right. Okay. This lesson next week then.
Yeah, I think that works.
Yeah.
Because then we have a whole.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, that's fine.
This lesson next week
On
on Hesmondhalgh. So the question will be. I will put it in the classroom, but it will for you to prepare. But it will be essentially the same wording as this, but with his quote. So it'll be Hesmondhalgh argues that media industries or cultural industries minimise risk and maximise profits through vertical and horizontal integration. Evaluate this theory, refer to Vogue and Big Issue in your response. It'll be 30 marks. So, in which case, if we're not doing it tomorrow, I'm going to move away from magazines tomorrow and go back to looking at some newspaper stuff,
Okay.
industry stuff. Yeah? So, consider our work on magazines done for now. Obviously, we'll come back to it after Easter, but I want to now focus on the newspaper section. Okay? We have essentially finished all of the content, but I'm aware that there are areas of newspaper stuff that we haven't done, for at least a year. So that's what I want to start on with our revision. But you will, over Easter, you'll be revising all of newspapers, all of magazines, and Water Aid for me. Those are the sections that we've done.
Is
Yeah.
Water Aid component one?
Water Aid is component 1. Yeah, so component 2, it's easiest to, if we list what component 2 is, and then anything that doesn't come in component 2 is component 1, all right? So component 2 is, and all 3 of these are compulsory, TV, magazines, and online media, which is Zuala and Latitude, yeah? Okay. So component 1, the thing about component 2 is you know that you're going to get asked about all of these. The thing about component 1 is you might be revising something that never comes up at all.
I think that's so crazy. But, like in component 1, like music videos made like
Yeah.
At all. Yeah.
We might get like radio.
So you've got music video,
Oh, that's how I know all of it.
newspapers.
It would be so much easier if we just knew.
It's like in psychology, you can know like memory the best, and then it's just research method.
TV,
So really?
etc. Advertising, which is Water
It
Aid.
will come up, but like you can get
an entire
memory
topic
only
will
like
come up as
4 multiple choice questions and then research methods 260 markers.
That's bananas.
It's
Yeah.
not even,
So you
can't
could
have a
be
60
so
marker
you
research
your
method.
entire best subject, your entire best so you're like the best. at
That's why you have to be the
research,
best at radio.
and then it could just not come up.
That's
You
crazy.
just get like 2 questions like, and then it's just like
That's so crazy.
which statistical test would you use? Yeah, I know.
Or design a study.
That's the 5 areas, isn't it? Music video,
Yeah.
newspapers, TV,
No,
well,
yeah,
advertising.
so, yeah, TV, advertising.
Like TV, so TV as in the bridge, etc. is in component 2. This is advertising, so it could be print or video advertising. Okay, so it could be Water Aid, or it could be Tide, or it could be Kiss of the Vampire. Radio and video games, but you only get 4 questions, so one of those is not going to come up. We don't know which one. All right,
That's so crazy.
but
Like,
newspapers
do you
can come
reckon-
up in any part of it, so I think it's almost inevitable you're going to get a question about newspapers. Yeah.
So guys,
Wait,
might
sorry.
not
Print
get-
advertising or video?
So either
Print or video
Those
advertising.
posters.
So
are-
advertising. So it could be Water Aid. It could be those 2 posters. Yeah. All right.
That's so scary.
So yeah, so we.
I really hope video games don't
I hope radio doesn't.
Oh, is that the one that? I'm alright with radio.
So no,
That's
radio and video
association.
games will be for audience, so it's going to be one of those two. Or newspapers.
Assassin's Creed.
I feel like Assassin's Creed is good for audiences though, because you
Because
understand
that's the
what
only one you can
targets-
use Bungerin.
Oh, that's so true.
That's the only one you can use Bungerin.
Really?
Because like, what else? You're not going to be like, I watched. I listened to Late Night Woman's Hour, and then I
Can
suddenly
you not
flew to
use it
Denmark.
for
Like,
formation or something?
but we don't do audience.
Yeah.
It's just language.
Also, how could Pandora be for formation? It's all about watching, isn't it? I get what you mean, like you can copy like things that show, but we don't study that.
But I think it's more about the violence.
Okay, all right. We'll leave it there then. So we're going back to newspapers tomorrow.
Cool.
Yeah. Okay.